Stephen, we got Ed on the line. What do you want to ask him?
When you say running due diligence, what does that entail?
Normally, when we go to contract on a property, we will do a property inspection, usually after we sign the contract, sometimes before, sometimes we do it ahead of time. And we'll go to the property and we'll walk through every unit. And we'll look at the mechanicals, we'll look at the condition of the property. Usually we'll do it with our property manager and their team. We've also used another property manager sometimes, and we'll bring roofers, we'll bring plumbers, we'll scope the lines.
Hey, I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different from everything else out there. I bring together new and inspiring investors on each and every episode and let the aspiring investors ask the questions that they need answered. And if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably have the same questions. So before you get to this episode that we have prepared for you, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. I'm very excited for today's show. We've got two amazing guests along the line with us today for one of our Ask the Expert episodes. We have Ed Modzel and Stephen Brown. So Ed, as is tradition, you're up first today. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. And it's been a long time coming. I think we talked about this over a year ago for the first time. And I think I probably dropped the ball on emails, but thanks for coming on the show finally. And it's good to have you.
Great to be here.
So do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you come from. Give us an idea of what your background is.
Okay, so let's see. I joined the Navy. I was in the Navy 6 years. Coming out of the Navy, I decided to get into real estate investment through Robert Allen, No Money Down. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember that, but actually he's still out there somewhere. And got into that on a part-time basis. The first property I got was a 5-family in New York. Everything was in New York for the first 35 years or so. I did that part-time, with my W-2. So my W-2 was in television, and I was on the technical side. So I worked in New York City for various television shows, and I loved my job. And then all of a sudden, one day, I think I was probably 60 years old, and I said, I probably don't have enough money to really retire unless I move to a third world country of sorts. So I said, I've always been wanting to get into real estate full time. So I started doing some research, and very quickly I decided I'm leaving my job after, all those years, and got into flipping houses and did that for a year and a half. The novelty wore off. I found out my job consisted of going to Home Depot 5 times a day for my contractors. During this time, of course, I visited the local RIA clubs. That's a real estate club. I became familiar with somebody doing some syndications. So that incubated in my mind for like a year and a half. And then I finally pulled the trigger on that, and I invested into limited partnerships with that outfit. One was in Mobile, Alabama, and the other one was Greenville, South Carolina. They've sold since then, and I did those about a week apart from each other. And after the second one, meaning after writing the check for the second one, because that's, all you really do. But you should do some research. And I didn't do enough research. If I knew then what I know now, I would have probably did a little differently, So I invested in them, and then I decided to do that actively, immediately. And I told my wife, I said, okay, I just finished a big flip and had nothing on the horizon. So I jumped into it. I started listening to a million podcasts. And, I needed to, fill in some of the educational gaps. So I went through some training programs, three of them, rapid fire, overlapping, and I wound up with Rod Cleef. And I'm still with him today. I've been with him 5 years, and I've been coaching with him for 4 years. So, I like that environment. It's not only the training, but it's the community of people that you network with.
Yeah.
That's important. All right. So that's where I was before I got into multifamily. So now I'm in multifamily. Now I'm a big multifamily investor. And I did one GP with some people, kind of like it was 128 unit in Houston. And then I did one more limited partnership. My market I picked was Atlanta. So I would go to Atlanta every 4 to 6 weeks. I'd go there for a week. My wife and I went down there. We made a little kind of a vacation and working thing about it. And we visited with brokers and property managers and all that. And I did that, I did that for like 9 months till I got my first deal.
Nice.
Actually, after 6 months, I got one, but it didn't work out.
Yeah. I mean, interesting. I mean, I had a similar situation. We were living in DC and looking in South Carolina to invest. And my wife and I would do the same thing, put the kids in the car, drive down. And we were fortunate that she had a lot of family in and around Columbia. So that's what we would do looking for our first property as well, is, once a month or once every other month, spend a week in South Carolina. And, I'd go to her properties and drop her off at her grandma's house or her cousin's house or something like that. And that's, I think there's a lot of benefit to that, to being present, to actually being in your market. Now, make sure I understood you right. So you say it took you 9 months to find your first property, and it was at 9 months of going down there about once a month?
Yeah, well, it took 6 months to find the first one. We went to contract, we did our due diligence. And then after the due diligence, I found out that the property was in way worse shape than I thought. And we tried to renegotiate or get some credits. They didn't want to hear about it. So we had to pull out of that one. I did see that it took like about 3 more years for them to actually sell that property.
Wow.
So it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
so I live in New York, as maybe I said, Long Island, and everything I did originally was in New York. And now with multifamily, New York is not a great place. Landlord friendly, not so much. The taxes on my house were about the same as the taxes on the first 40 unit I bought in Atlanta, stuff like that. So I finally did get my first deal in Atlanta, and then I built up, quite a number of units in Atlanta, and I'm still down there. But then I branched out all over the place. I've done 24 syndications in the last 5 years.
Nice.
So I've been busy.
Yeah, 24. That's a good number. I mean, I'm at 10. You had a couple year head start on me. So, I think hopefully when I'm 5 years into the business, I'll have 24 as well. I'm 3 years into the business with 10. So, but yeah, that's a fair amount of syndications for anybody. So now, what were some of the biggest challenges you had starting out? So, I mean, you had a little bit of real estate history. You had a handful of, a small portfolio in New York City. You did some fix and flips. What was the biggest friction point jumping into multifamily?
Well, a couple of things. Let's see. Being in single families, you tend to do everything yourself and keep everything in one, all to yourself. And what I found out, one of my biggest things I had to change was working with teams. I think it's all about teamwork. You've heard of, the old saying, teamwork makes the dream work.
Teamwork. Yep.
And it's true. The other thing is I did everything by myself. So I had that, and to steal something from Jake and Gino, I had the I'm a mentality. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do everything, What? $50 to change a toilet? I could do that myself,
Yep.
in
Save
15
myself
minutes.
$50. Yeah, exactly.
Of course, it took me an hour and a half because I had to go to Home Depot 3 times.
Well, I'll be honest. The last time I changed a toilet to save money, I ended up having to buy a new toilet because I broke the port. Anyway, I ended up breaking the toilet and had to get an extra wax ring because I screwed placement on it and everything else. And
Yep.
I would have been far better off in that situation hiring somebody. I didn't know that when I started, but yeah, I have the same issue. I'm just not that handy, apparently.
Yeah, I definitely, learned that not to do that because whatever type of work you're doing, whether it's changing a toilet or painting, that's how much you're kind of earning, really.
Yeah.
And there's always been, there's been times where I've made, I don't know, I can't think of a particular one, but I've negotiated something on a phone call that saved me $50,000 on a deal.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, how long would that take me to, if I was doing all my own painting and changing of toilets and everything else?
Long time is the answer.
Yeah.
Long time. Yeah.
So those are two things that I really learned.
I like it. I love it. Well, let's talk about something I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, more about motivation. I call it your big burning why. So what is your big burning why?
My big burning why is really probably very similar to a lot of people, and that is to create generational wealth. I've been in real estate since I was part-time, since I was 25, but I didn't read like Rich Dad, Poor Dad when it first came out. I did read it 5 years ago or something, and I didn't really instill that sort of, upbringing with my 3 kids, and I kind of regret that. So my big why is to, get my 3 children and grandson, benefiting from the real estate and involved in this. And that's my big why.
Yeah.
Family.
I think you're right. It's very similar. And I've asked that question, hundreds of times on the podcast now. And it's very similar. It's almost always about family. It's almost always about family. So I think that's the common trend there. So let's talk about, the types of deals you do. If you'd go ahead and give us some details, either, pick your first, your favorite, or most recent, and give us an idea of type of deals you do.
Yeah, sure. This is not a typical deal that I do, but I'll tell you about the first one. Okay, so the first one was a 40 unit in Atlanta. And okay, when I was doing that deal that I didn't do, that was a 52 unit. And the broker said, hey, I got this other 40 unit I want you to take a look at. And I said, I don't have time for that. I can only do one deal at a time, which is probably good advice for somebody just starting. So I did ride through that property on the day that I was doing my due diligence on the one that I bailed out of, right? So that 40 unit, I didn't make an offer on it. Somebody else did. They went to contract on it, and they were about to fall out of contract. And my broker said to me, who I had a good relationship with, hey, I have that deal that you looked at. It's about to fall out of contract, I think. And if you're interested, I could, slip you right in there,
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, let me take a look at it again. So I did. And I said, yeah, this is good. And I talked to a property manager that I had met down there, and I've been kind of running all my properties through him, mainly because he was an investor. He was a 3rd generation property manager and investor. and he knew Atlanta. Atlanta is very diverse. There's so many different markets in Atlanta. And I would run all the properties that I came across, was looking at past this guy, and he would give me a very good, perspective on that area, pros and cons. And that's why I went on to do a third limited partnership with him, just to kind of reciprocate the good advice that he was giving me and such.
Nice.
So we did this 40 unit, and my broker also helped me secure the lending. Okay, I had reached out to 3 lenders. Now I'm from New York. The lenders I was looking at, the loan was like 1.3 million, something like that. And who am I kidding? I know exactly what it is. 1.368 million.
Yeah, right.
And it was a local bank that I got it through. And I had gone to 3 local banks, and one of them said, okay, there's nobody on your team from Atlanta. We can't loan to you. Maybe we'll do the second deal with you. I said, okay. The next lender said, we'll loan to you, but we're only going to give you 60% LTV. And then the third lender that my broker introduced me to, they gave me a sweetheart of a deal. They gave me 80% financing on the purchase and 100% of the CapEx with the closing costs rolled into that. So I wouldn't recommend doing this now on a big deal, but my loan was more than the purchase price, is the way it all came together. And I did a joint venture on that one. And so I got 4 other people to invest in that with me. I know a lot more now about the, SEC regulations and all that. I probably broke a couple of them here because I did all the work. I told people what was going on and I let them weigh in, but I pretty much made all the day-to-day decisions. I did one thing that I don't recommend people doing, but my wife and I actually moved down to the property and lived on the property for 17 months. That's the entire time that we own the property. It was supposed to be for 9 months until we got it stabilized. Okay. I renovated 22 of the 40 units. We were getting like $250 rent bumps, which is actually kind of common now.
And when you said you renovated it, you did the work as well?
Well, I also did a lot of the work, but I did I hired everybody, and I had like 4 to 6 different people that I hired. And I used painting contractors and flooring contractors, but everything else I hired, and some of the people I had actually show how to do the work, or at least to my level of expectations. I found out that it was a little bit different in Atlanta than it is in New York. A lot of people doing, contracting work there are not real contractors. And, there was a lot to be left to be desired as to the quality of their work. So we renovated, like 22 of the units, like I said. And for the first 6 months, I had a property manager. Then I fired them, hired another one that I kind of knew already for 6 months. They stayed for 5 months, and then I had to fire them. And then my wife and I managed it for the last 6 months. We did hire somebody to work there like 20 hours a week, a woman, to sit at the desk. But we kind of controlled everything, and the books and all that. And we wound up selling the property 17 months after we bought it. So 17 months from closing to closing. Our investors made 139% return on their investment, or 90% AAR, I guess.
Yeah, that's a pretty good number. I'd do that all day if I could.
Yeah, I would too. Unfortunately, what I learned too is that on smaller properties, you could have very big returns, but it doesn't mean a lot in dollars. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's where the next lesson I learned, I'll just throw it in real quick. I won't go too far into it. But while I was there, I started getting involved in many other properties. So now on this property, another piece of advice I have is get on a team where there's somebody on that team more experienced than you, and then you could benefit from their experience.
Yeah.
I had the I'm a mentality, so I had to be the one leading the charge. So consequently, everything I did was a big learning experience. Very big decisions where now they're very simple decisions. But while I was there, the very next property I got in was a portfolio of 2 properties, and it was 456 units.
Mm-hmm.
We just sold that, by the way, earlier this year. I made like $1 million on that,
Nice.
which was nice.
Yeah.
But that operator lived in Atlanta. He was experienced. So he had his in-house property management, that's a critical thing, is property management.
It is
Critical.
We've had difficulties finding the right company, but yeah. Well, thanks for the rundown on that one. I think I've seen the exact same thing. I'm GP and LP on a couple of smaller properties, and you're right. I mean, the numbers may look fantastic, but the overall amount of money that gets kicked back is not life changing. But
Right.
That said, so last question for you before we bring Stephen on. What's next for you?
Okay, so this kind of all ties in from my learning over the last 5 years. I've been an operator on probably 15 or 16 of those properties that I mentioned, the 24. I've been an operator or co-operator. I've raised money on all of them. I've been, a loan guarantor on probably 20 of them or 18 of them, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. Now, the direction I'm going in now is I'm now going to be teaming up with a handful of operators that I've identified some, and I'm continuing to identify them. And the criteria is as follows: that they have their own in-house property management company, because that has worked the best for me.
Yep.
Secondly, they live in the market where they invest. In other words, I'm doing a deal right now in San Antonio. The operator that's on our team has a property management company, and he lives in San Antonio. Yep. So that works out great.
Makes sense.
The guy I invested with in Atlanta, he lives in Atlanta. He looks for property in Atlanta. That's another big thing that I learned is local knowledge. Got to have local knowledge. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing is I'm teaming up with these people, and I'm really concentrating on the capital raising aspect and also the asset management. So I have a team. There's 3 of us. So I have one person that does the underwriting, another person that does the asset management, and I do coaching and capital raising.
Nice. Yeah, I like that model. I like the idea. A lot of people, it's easy to invest anywhere in the world right now. You have a competitive advantage in your own backyard over just about anybody. And I think that's it's one of those things that I'm looking to do here soon as well. I'm going to start going deep in one market, and it's going to be a market that's near and dear to my heart, where I grew up. But very much appreciate that, and I think that's smart money. The criteria that you have right there. It's you're not going to lose investor money ever, if you're doing it right. So that said, let's shift gears and bring Stephen on. So Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It's an honor to be here. Sincerely, thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. So do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm 25 years old. I am a real estate investor from Toledo, Ohio. And I currently own 15 units of smaller residential multifamily properties here in the area. I'm a real estate agent as well. I sell homes here, and I'm trying to segue into the commercial multifamily space here in Toledo, and also potentially somewhere else around the country if I decide to move.
Yeah. So one question for you, did you become a real estate agent to help you invest, or did you start investing or did you get into investing because you were a real estate agent?
No, it's actually the other way around. So I started investing, and I thought I needed a license to be a better investor, and so I became an agent. Turns out I'm really more of a salesperson myself, just kind of an extrovert, and I always like chasing the deals. So I became really good at that, but that was never really my intention. My intention was to use it for investing purposes. But now I've seen that multifamily is more of the way to go rather than the single family route, and so that's kind of where I'm going now.
Well, it can pay the bills and keep food on your table until you got enough multifamily to do that. So yeah, and it's very, very related as well. So one thing Ed mentioned is he wants local operators who know the market. I think your day job really aligns with getting to know the market. Once again, question I ask everybody on the show, and you're not going to get a free pass, but what is your big burning why?
For me, my big burning why is I love to create a lifestyle where I can travel the world with my family and experience what the world has to offer, rather than dedicate years upon end working in an office and not being able to experience the world with my family, my friends. And one of the other reasons why I'm looking more into the syndication space is I've always wanted to be part of a team, and being part of something bigger than just myself. And, I believe in connections and relationships, and I believe that that's just something that fulfills you. And so I'd love to do this with others and create a lifestyle where, I can travel, I have a teammate that travels, and we experience the world in that way.
Nice. Yeah, the big wide world out there, and I think more people should go get to know it. So very much appreciate you sharing that, and we're gonna do our best to give you a little bit of advice to get you on that road to success. And that said, Stephen, we got Ed on the line. What do you want to ask him?
Well, I have a few questions. I mean, I know Ed mentioned earlier in the podcast about running due diligence on his first deal and realizing that it was kind of a nightmare. And so I'm just kind of curious, when you say running due diligence, what does that entail? And then you also said that you had an asset manager, and I just wanted to see what that kind of entails as well, because a lot of people throw these terms around. I feel like it's not really broken down in the depth on podcasts that at least I've been listening to.
Okay, as far as due diligence, that there's a couple different forms of that. One is going to be like a physical due diligence. Normally, when we go to contract on a property, we will do a property inspection, usually after we sign the contract, sometimes before, sometimes we do it ahead of time. And we'll go to the property and we'll walk through every unit. And we'll look at the mechanicals, we'll look at the condition of the property. Usually we'll do it with our property manager and their team. We've also used another property manager sometimes, and we'll bring roofers, we'll bring plumbers, we'll scope the lines. When I say scope the lines, what we mean is the sewer lines. Especially in areas like Texas, these sewer lines, if you're buying some older properties, which we tend to do, in the 70s and 80s, the sewer lines may start sinking, and some of them are cast iron. Cast iron has a 40-year lifespan, and that's a very big expense. So we will scope a couple of them, and maybe 10%. If we see any problems, we'll scope some more.
So would you recommend then getting these contractors and your property manager in place before you even have a property under contract at that point?
No, I don't think that's necessary. what we do is, but I do feel that it's necessary to have a property manager or two or three that you've already spoken to ahead of time, because this is what I like to do. And it ties into, your question about rehab costs. So if I have a property that I'm looking at and considering, I'm underwriting it. And once I start getting serious about it, before I submit an offer, I'm going to want to submit my underwriting or the financials to a property manager that I like.
Yeah.
Okay. And naturally, they're going to have local knowledge, and they're going to look at the rental income. And I'm going to tell them what my plan is, because I'm going to do my own research, and I'm going to say, hey, these are the rents we're getting on the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms right now. How do you think that fits in with the market? We're hoping to get a $150 rent bump on each one of these for doing this work on them. And they will either agree with me or not. Okay. As you start getting more and more experienced, you're going to rely on your own, research as well. And if you have a property manager that says, oh, no, we could never raise the rents $150, well, you got one of two things you got to do. One, find another property manager, or you have to change your outlook.
Yeah.
So due diligence, when I go to contract on a property, my property manager already knows about it. Okay. Or in my case, I'm teaming up with somebody that has an in-house property management company.
Yep.
And, their head of maintenance usually knows about most of the items like mechanicals. When I say mechanicals, I'm talking about your HVAC system, boilers, that type of thing. So he'll know about that. He'll know about most items. Okay. Anybody else will be brought in either on that day, or it could be, usually I have like 2 weeks to 30 days for due diligence. And you could bring in the roofer to look at the roofs on the day that you inspect all the units, or it could be the next day or the day before. It doesn't really matter. And I like to have the plumber there to scoping the lines the day that I'm there, because I could go over and talk to him and say, hey, what'd you find? Or, he'll call us over and we'll look at the scope, and we could see what the problem that he's showing us right there and then. There's also other kinds of due diligence, which has to do with what we call a lease audit. Okay, what the property manager will do, or you could do, I've done it myself, you print out a rent roll. A rent roll, even if it's a 10 unit, okay, you got 10 units. These are the rents for each unit. And then you do a lease audit. Now, if it's only 10 units, they could probably send you electronically the 10 leases, and you can compare the lease to what it says in the rent roll. Now, remember, the lease is what the tenant signed, so that's going to have the most validity. That's what's going to be held up in a court of law and everything else. And you want to make sure that the rent roll and the lease matches.
Yeah, that's good. So a couple of things there. I wholeheartedly agree. Property manager's key, and we definitely have done something similar. But when at all possible, we like to get everybody there the same day, the day that we're there. But like Ed said, you're juggling contractors a lot of times, and sometimes their schedules just don't permit. But we have learned that scoping lines is important. There's a couple of properties we did up front where we didn't, and we ended up with some large repair bills. But anyway, that's what else you got? Next question, Stephen.
Yeah, I guess the next question is more of just underwriting, because I get a lot of different advice from other investors. And I was just wondering, when it comes to rehab, turnover, and reserves, what would you say would be your baseline numbers? Because I've heard people say, oh, I do $300 per door for reserves or for turnover, like Brian was telling me, like $1,000, you're going to budget that out. But is it based on how many units that you're kind of going to do that first year? Or is it based off of just $1,000 times the number of units in the property?
Mhm.
Just kind of what you set aside typically for maybe even percentages, just so that I can have a general idea of what to underwrite with.
Okay, let's talk about CapEx reserves. That's something that is a lender requirement. And
Correct.
they'll tell you how much you need to allocate for that. If it's an older property, let's say 1970 or even older, they're probably going to tell you $300 per unit per year. And it's a reserve. You can actually draw from that after a year or maybe even during that time. If it's a newer property, it might only be $250. So that's pretty standard.
That's what I figured.
That's pretty standard. Now, as far as operating reserves, you figure out all your expenses of buying the property, but then think about it like, okay, on day one, I need to start our bank account with some money in there just in case a bill comes through. We don't want to start the cash register empty. So this makes me sleep at night. Originally, I used to do $1,000 per unit. So if it's 100 unit, we'd have $100,000. Now I like to do 4 months of expenses, and that usually equates to about 2,000 or a little over 2,000 a unit. Okay. I know other people, they want to sleep better at night, so they do a 6-month reserve. So in this market that we're in right now with some crazy interest rates, and it's a little volatile, it's a little scary out there, to feel safer, you want to have a nice reserve there for your operating account. Now, the other thing you mentioned was as far as rehab costs. Okay, one thing that I usually ask when I'm looking at a property, and it's a good question because the bank's going to ask you too, and that is, what capital improvements has the seller done to the property since they owned it for the last 18 months, 2 years, 10 years, whatever? And, let's say the person bought the property 2 years ago for $5 million. Now they're selling it for $10 million. The bank wants to know, what did they do in the 2 years or whatever that they owned it? And you want to have that list ready. And it is something that the seller, if they've done some sizable CapEx, they're proud of, and that will tell you, and they'll tell you how much they spent on it. A big item is roofs. When were the roofs replaced? If it was 25 years ago, guess what? You need to allocate new roofs. But then I look at how many of the units what percentage of the units have been upgraded. We call them classic units and premium. There's a couple other terms out there, but those are basically, classic means that if the property is 1985, it means they really haven't been upgraded since 1985 or maybe 15. Even if something hasn't been upgraded in 15 years, it's already out of date. And that could be a classic unit and a premium unit. So you want to see what the difference is between a rent on a premium unit and a classic unit. Okay. And that will determine whether you want to renovate these units. I like to get a payback period of 48 months. So if it costs, or let's say, if it costs $7,000 to renovate a unit and I'm only going to get $100 rent bump, I probably don't want to do that because it's going to take me 70 months. What is that? 6 years, 7 years, 6 years to get a payback on that. So I don't do that. Again, this is what I would ask my property management, or they would know best on what a premium unit is and what the cost of it. You're talking flooring, a couple thousand, you're talking appliances, that's another 1,500, a paint job, that's depending on where you are, $800 to $1,000. You got a lighting package, you got new hardware, new cabinets. How far do you want to go?
Yeah.
What I'm saying in this day right now is that in the last year and a half, rents have gone up and up and up and up, and we are getting double-digit rent increases without doing a lot of renovations. So don't think that you have to go in there and renovate all these units. Really find out from your property management, what do you need to do? I'll give you a quick example. You don't want to put granite countertops in a C- unit area where it's not going to get you any more rent.
Yeah.
Okay, you only want to, that was a big lesson I had to learn going from single family to multifamily. I wanted to over renovate everything. Luckily, I had some people that talked some sense into me, and I did what was necessary, and I went a little beyond that,
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the granite one, we were having that conversation last week on a property where we are getting the rent bumps we had forecasted. And so now we're like, do we really need granite, or should we just do Formica? If you're getting the rent bumps, you may as well not spend that extra money. So a lot of wisdom there. Very, very thorough answer. Unfortunately, we are out of time now. So just like to thank both of you for coming on the show again today. And I've got one last question for each of you. Ed, you get to go first. How can listeners learn more about you?
Sure. You go to my website. It's gimmeshelterequity.com. And Gimme is spelled Gimme. I'm a Rolling Stones fan. I kind of swiped it from them. Gimmeshelterequity.com.
That sounds great. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And Stephen, same question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
Yeah, there's a few ways to get in touch with me. One is Bigger Pockets, just Stephen Brown. LinkedIn, Stephen Brown, and then my personal Instagram is Stephen Brown 697. More than happy to connect and help out anybody that's trying to get into the real estate industry or just wants to network.
Sounds good. And we'll put links into the show notes as well, so you can connect with the right Stephen Brown. I assume there's more than one Stephen Brown out there.
I'm the only one.
You're the only one. Okay, there we go. So Stephen Brown, number one, not 697. Just teasing. But anyway, thanks again, guys. Appreciate your time. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the week.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
All right. Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call the Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.